So today in this video I'm going to talk about how I grow watermelons. And I've been growing watermelons for several years now. I have a dedicated garden patch in my backyard that is strictly just for growing watermelons. Right now you might see a banana plant growing in there. That's more of an experimental thing. I just put it in there this year. But typically all I grow in that garden is watermelons. And I've been trying to grow watermelons for many, many years, and I've had different experiences with it. And I'm going to share that with you guys. And anyone out there who wants to try to grow watermelons, I'm going to give you some tips and go through what I do to grow them. Now, other people might do it differently than me. This is just my experience, and I've had very good success with it. So, just take it as a face value. So first I'm going to talk about how to start the seeds. Now, it is middle of May now, and if you haven't already started your watermelon seeds, you need to do so now. You want to start them at least 2 weeks before the last potential frost, but not too much before that, because if you get seeds that start coming up that you're growing inside and they start growing too big, by the time they get so big and then you transplant them outside, they're going to be very stressed and you're actually going to regress instead of progress. So it's best to only start them so that they're sprouts, and then when you put them outside, they can acclimate a lot quicker to being in that environment under the stronger sunlight and everything. So that's the first thing. Get your seed started about 2 weeks before, not too long, not too early, and not too late. Because watermelon, depending on the variety, is going to take a long time for it to grow and produce fruit. And you may not, wherever you are, you may not have as long as a summer as we have. And you might need some more time with that. So it's best to get them started inside. However, the way I do it, because the weather always changes, this is Ohio, so depending on the weather, the time of the year, it could be different all the time. So what I usually do is I start the seeds inside. I usually get a packet or two. I start half of them inside and half of them direct sow outside in that watermelon patch. So that way, in case we have good conditions, the sprouts will start outside sooner and they won't be stressed from the transplant. But if we have cold weather, that way I can take the ones that grew in the house and put them outside, and they're already started and ready to go, and I have a jump on the season. So starting the seeds, the way you want to do it, I do it 3 different ways myself, just to kind of cover all the angles. I use starter pots for 1/3 of the seeds. And I use the paper towel method for the other 1/3 of the seeds, and then the other 1/3 go outside. So I know I said half and half, but you get what I mean. So basically here I have a tray. It's a little dirty, it gets used. This is just a little tray here. You can pick these up, practically anywhere. You'll want to put your seed starting pots in something like this, and then I have this little cover here which I've poked holes in, and it's good to have ventilation. If you have it just completely sealed up and there's no air circulation whatsoever, you're going to risk more mold. So get one of these, and then get little starter pots like this here. These haven't started yet, and I'm going to talk about why that is in a second. They're almost poking through the soil, but I have those, and then I have these, and I do usually 3 per section. This is all I really need, because I only have 1 mound that's going in my garden, and you only want maximum of 6 plants in the mound anyway, so you don't really need any more than this. But 3 in each of these little sections is what I got, and these have already started sprouting. So you're going to take, what I usually do is I'll have one like this, and it will be filled with just a potting soil or a seed starting mix, and I put that in that tray I just showed you, and then put the dome over it, and I make these wet, not soaking wet. You don't want to put water in the bottom of the tray or nothing. Just want to make sure that the soil is moist, not soaking wet. That's very important, otherwise you're going to cause rot. So this sits in there, and then the heat mat goes underneath it, and the heat mat I have right here. This is the heat mat here. It really doesn't matter on the brand. Just make sure it works right. So the heat mat's going to shave off a lot of time. You're going to have a lot more success with germination. And the ones I just showed you here that are poking through the soil, these here have been on that heat mat. It's only been like 5 days. Then these other ones here, I put these in the soil after I started after I started them in the paper towel method. So what I did with that is you just take a bag, a sandwich bag or a quart bag, take a paper towel, make it moist, not dripping wet, just moist, put your seeds in there, fold it over, and then put that in the bag. Put the bag in a dark place. It doesn't need to be, like really hot, but make sure it's at least room temperature, so between 70 to 80 degrees is where you want it to be. And then check it every couple days. Once they start poking out a tiny little root out of that seed, that's the time you're going to want to put them in the soil. And the little starter pot I just showed you here, that's what I put in here. And so these are basically like a day or two behind the other ones. So it shaves off, the heating mat shaves off a little bit of time. I start them different ways because not only for seeing what works best, but also for giving it a better success rate. So starting them outside may work better. It may not work as well as starting them inside. It just depends on the weather during the time of the year or whatever is going on that year. So that's how I start them. So you also want to make sure they're put under enough light. So if you don't have enough light intensity, you're going to start getting some elongation on there. That's going to further stress out the plant too when you go to transplant it as well, because under that more intense light, it's going to be a very weak plant, and it's not going to be able to handle that intense light. So it's either going to burn it out, or it's going to stop growing for quite some time, and then you're going to lose all that progression you had from the beginning of the season. So that's about it for talking about the seed starting. If there's any more questions on that, I'll answer them. Just leave them in the comments. So as far as preparing the place where you're going to plant them, first of all, you need a lot of room. My garden is about 12 by 16 roughly. It's probably more closer to 13 by 15. It doesn't matter. It's close to that. So that is a raised bed, and it wasn't always a raised bed. It kind of took some time to work it up to that point, because it started out as just kind of more like a mound on top of the ground. And my soil here is very clay-like, and the clay is very dense. And the only way I can really amend the clay to utilize what's there and to make it more loose is basically just adding a lot of sand to it. So what I did is I bought, I don't know, probably 20 bags of sand. I don't remember the weight on them, but it was just a lot of sand. Poured it all over there, and then some peat moss, a little bit of that, and then tilled all that together to kind of make the soil a little bit better. Over the years, I've added grass and leaves to it to compost on top of that, and then every year I would till that in until now, to where I basically got a really good base of very rich soil and compost. It's probably about 6 inches thick now at least, and that's all from the years of composting on top of it. And what I normally do is every year before I start the garden, so probably in April, I would say, in Ohio anyways, in April I'll till up the garden. You don't want to till too deep. You don't want to disturb a lot of the structure of the soil, because there's a lot of microbes that live in the soil, and if you start breaking up those clumps and pulverizing it, you're really breaking apart the soil structure, which is very important to the fertility of the soil. So don't till too much. Don't make it a powder, and you just want to basically churn it up enough to where everything's kind of getting mixed, and you want to get some oxygen into the dirt, into the soil. So the best thing to do is to just till it up a little bit, just the first few inches, just to stir everything up, and that's about it. Don't overdo it. So I do that. I till up usually in April sometime, and then that gives everything kind of time to settle out. And then what I do is grass. I put grass on the garden on top. Not a thick layer, a nice thin layer, maybe 2 to 3 inches at most. Grass is very, very good for the garden, especially when you don't have a lot in the garden and you're just doing a watermelon patch. That would be a lot of open ground for weeds to grow, and grass suppresses the weeds better than anything I've ever tried before. It's a natural, organic way to do it. Grass provides fertilizer for the soil, a lot of nitrogen. It helps insulate the soil so it's not getting baked from the sun and drying out. It holds that moisture in for a long, long time. And it also brings the worms up to the surface. And actually, after you till and loosen up that soil, it's a better environment for more worms to get into that soil. And when the worms are crawling through the soil, they're doing a couple things, mainly two things I want to talk about. And first thing is they provide oxygen into the soil. They're creating pathways through there. There's air getting in through there, and it's providing oxygen to the roots and to the microbes in the soil to live. The other thing, which is worm casting. So basically, the worms secrete out what they eat, and it's called worm castings. And worm castings are one of the most sought after organic compost or fertilizer amendments to a soil. Worm castings are amazing for growing plants, and a lot of people swear by it. It's actually pretty expensive if you want to buy it just by itself. So when worms are crawling through there, it harbors an environment for them to reproduce more in. So you get more worms, more worm castings, more oxygen, all very good things for the soil. So the grass itself also, it creates like this interweaved layer so the weeds can't penetrate up through it. The only thing that I've seen that can penetrate up through grass clippings is certain types of other grass, and I don't know what type of grass it is, but it's not really a domesticated grass. It's more like a weed grass, and it tends to poke up through it, but it's not a whole lot, and it's very easy just to pull them out. So I mentioned about insulating the soil with the grass. So I usually do 2 layers. So when I mow my grass for the first part of the season, I dump all the clippings onto the garden, spread it out to about maybe a 3-inch layer of grass clippings. I allow that to dry out. It's important that you don't put it down in heaps because you don't want it to start composting. You want it to be dry so it doesn't start breaking down over the season. You want it to last. Also, you don't want it to it gets really gooey if it starts breaking down, which can be kind of gross and kind of bad. Anyways, you want to put down a second layer on top of that. After the first layer is kind of dried out enough in the sun, then you put another layer on top of that. This is what I do. You don't really have to do this, but a second layer, maybe 3 to 4 inches thick of grass. I know it sounds like a lot, but that actually starts to compress down as it dries out anyways. So that's all you really need as far as covering the soil. That will last over the entire season. And when the watermelons grow, they will actually rest on top of that. It creates kind of like a cushion for them, and that way they're not sitting on the soil either. And sometimes when the watermelon sits on the soil, they get slugs that crawl on them and stuff like that. And sometimes it can cause rot, but the grass creates kind of like almost like a nest for them to rest in, and it works out pretty well. So through the season, I do not water my garden. When I first if I do a transplant from inside to outside and I put the seedlings outside, for about the first couple days I'll go and dump some water on the seedlings just so they can get rooted. But once that happens, I don't water at all. I've had plenty of success growing a lot of watermelons, very good watermelons, without watering the garden whatsoever. It rains every now and then, and those grass clippings, they keep the moisture in that soil, and the roots will just grow underneath all that and seek out the moisture. I don't have to do anything. Plus, when you start getting watermelons, they will, if you water it too much, they will basically expand, and sometimes they can split. One of the things that a lot of people who are new to growing plants, they think they need to water it every day, and that's just not true. A lot of people actually make the mistake of overwatering, and it's a lot better to underwater than to overwater, because you can cause a lot of problems by overwatering. So for me, I don't water at all. All I do is I let them grow and hope that it doesn't actually rain too much when they're in the phases of actually growing the melon, because like I said, that can actually split the melon because they start growing too quickly. So it's okay to water plenty during the vegetative growth stage of the plant, so before it's actually producing the melons. But after that, you want to try to stop watering it all. But for me, I don't water it at all from any of the phases except for when I first put them in the ground from inside to outside when they're seedlings. So as far as growing the melons, also, you don't necessarily have to have a raised bed, but if you are going to plant them on the ground, you want to plant them on a mound, or at least dig a trough next to where you plant them, because you don't want them sitting in too compact of soil, and you don't want them to be too soaking wet either, because that can cause root rot. So I always grow it in a mound, and what I do is I dump some perlite in that mound and till that in there, so it's basically kind of like a potting soil. And then I'll mix a little bit of Melorganite, which is a organic fertilizer. You can find that at Home Depot or Lowe's. I'll also mix a little bit of Osmocote in that mound as well, and maybe some other fertilizer if I have it around. It really doesn't matter all that much. Just something so that when you plant the seedlings in there, there's enough different nutrients available to them to kind of utilize immediately, because you want to get them growing quickly. So you don't have to fertilize, but they're gonna not grow as quickly. So if you do that, you're going to be better off in the long run, because some melons are going to take 100 days to produce, and you may not have that long of a summer or that favorable of a season to do it. So it's good to get them going quicker. So the way you want to harvest the melon, how do you know when it's ripe? Well, there's a couple different methods. When the melon it's going to be growing big, and you're going to notice, it doesn't have to be big to be ready to harvest, but you're going to notice it growing. And then if it gets to the point where it starts getting like lumpy on the surface, like a little, not smooth but wavy, it's probably almost time to pick it. But if it's not doing that, the other ways you can look at it is look underneath it. Be very careful when you turn it. You don't want to break the stem off. But if you look underneath it, it's going to look yellow. If it's very pale yellow, it's probably not ready. If it's dark yellow, it probably is ready. There's also a little, right next to where the stem goes into the melon, where that stem actually attaches to the vine, there's a tendril, and that's the little fingers that lash onto things. That little tendril is going to start to dry up at some point. When it starts to dry up and turn brown, that's another sign that your melon is almost ripe. There's also what they call a spoon leaf right next to that tendril, and that spoon leaf it's not like any other leaves on the vine. It's just a little tiny thing, and it's shaped like a spoon. That will also start to dry up. If both of those things are dry, your melon is probably ripe and ready. But the other method too is making sure it's yellow underneath. If it's not yellow at all underneath and both of those things are dried up, it's probably not ready. It needs to be at least a little pale yellow. So that's how you know it's time to pick them. I think that's about it for this video. I know this is a little bit long, but I kind of wanted to cover a lot of things about what I do, and I hope that helps other people who are maybe new to it. So the tips I can really suggest is leaves and grass in your garden for sure. Compost, and over the winter, the other thing about the grass is if the grass is still on the surface, which it hasn't decomposed, because like I said before, if it's too thick, it'll start to decompose. If you put it on layers, let it dry out, it's going to stay there. So over the winter, that's going to insulate the soil and make sure you maintain a higher microbe level in the soil, because the microbes are very important to your soil. So that will remain there throughout the winter. It'll help insulate the soil through the cold, and then the following season you can tilth it in and then add new grass on top of that. All right, so that's about it for this video. Appreciate everyone who's watched it this long, and I hope that helps everyone. Any questions that I didn't cover, or if there's something else you want to know about growing watermelons, leave them in the comments. I'll answer the question. And thanks for watching this video. See you in the next one.